Undoubtedly, something has shifted. You can see it shifting in the talk about all of this in the UK, in the way that David Cameron has been framing the approach of the government, the Foreign Office, to supporting Israel. And I think it's a big thing, obviously, for the Israeli government as to whether they're going to really take note of these signals. Obviously, they have in terms of opening one of the additional crossings into Gaza, so more lorries for aid and support can get through, and whether they are actually going to change their tactics.
Still with us, Nicky Morgan, former Conservative Education Secretary, and Jack McConnell, former First Minister of Scotland. We're looking at the main stories, the main issues of the day, and of course that includes Joe Biden giving somewhat of an ultimatum, actually, to Benjamin Netanyahu. Within hours of a phone call between the two of them, Israel pledged to open 2 new routes into Gaza for humanitarian aid. The US president told the Israeli Prime Minister that American support depends on action to protect civilians and aid workers. He also called for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. Nikki, I wonder if you feel that the language, and there's a definite change in tone in this language. I mean, there's some suggestions today that even President Biden was saying that the US could withhold weapons deliveries to Israel if it doesn't address the humanitarian situation in Gaza. Also, a White House spokesperson saying, if they don't do what we want, then just watch this space and we'll see what we're going to do about it. Do you think this is the right approach to Israel right now, Nikki?
Well, I think it does definitely reflect a shift. We are now, 6 months on from the horrendous events of the 7th of October. And I think that what we have seen is that Israel's tactics have not resulted in, for example, all their hostages coming home, which is ultimately what the Israeli government says it wants to achieve. So I think it's absolutely right that, and having seen the destruction in Gaza, that Israel's allies, and the US has to be the lead in this because it is the most powerful ally, is saying, we want you to rethink the approach now. And I should just say, I don't think this in any way lessens the sympathy or the support that the allies and parliamentarians around the world wanted to give Israel because of the horrendous nature of those 7th of October attacks. But I think undoubtedly something has shifted. You can see it shifting in the talk about all of this in the UK, in the way that David Cameron has been framing the approach of the government, the Foreign Office, to supporting Israel. And I think it's a big thing, obviously, for the Israeli government as to whether they're going to really take note of these signals. Obviously, they have in terms of opening one of the additional crossings into Gaza, so more lorries for aid and support can get through, and whether they are actually going to change their tactics. And I think for the Americans, and then I hope the UK government will follow, for example, which is actually just to keep saying to the Israeli government, you have got to change the way that you are doing this. It is not working. We cannot continue to support you, and that might well end up being that people decide not to supply weapons. Although I think the point that you were making earlier on in the programme, which is that actually, or perhaps yesterday, the amount of weaponry that, for example, the UK support that provide to Israel is pretty tiny. But I mean, I suppose it's ultimately a symbolic gesture.
I mean, it's interesting that the White House spokesman saying we want to see real changes on the Israeli side. If we don't see changes, there will have to be changes on our side.
Yeah.
It's quite strong words, isn't it, Jack?
Yeah, I think it's good to have a grown-up in the White House at the moment, and an excellent Secretary of State. We've had our conversations on this programme over recent months about the odd concern that we might have about the president and his age and his public appearances, but in private he seems to be making, as he has had a record of in all his decades in politics, he seems to be making balanced judgments and being firm and firmer as this has gone on. So I'm glad that we've got a grown up there. I think it's important. There are too few elsewhere in the world at the moment, and the alternative would be much worse than the White House. So that's a good development. I think on this incident this week, we have to be absolutely clear that the targeting of 3 clearly marked vehicles for a humanitarian aid organisation is just utterly unacceptable. And those who fired the missiles, those who were responsible for ordering them, need to be prosecuted. That should be absolutely clear. But it doesn't detract from the wider situation, which is that Israel has to be able to defend itself, stop these terrorists creating the carnage that they do. And in the longer term, all of us need to support anybody who is more moderate than the current Israeli government, and anybody who is more moderate than Hamas, who wants to get together and talk about a longer term solution. And so I think we've got a threefold response here. We need to be firm that targeting humanitarian aid workers is utterly unacceptable and should lead to prosecution. And that this is not an accident. These vehicles were clearly marked. Secondly, though, that Israel must be able to deal with terrorists who cause carnage on their soil. But in the longer term, we have to continue to pursue and support anybody who is trying to find a longer term solution.
Mm.